So Season 6A. At the beginning of Season 6, Tony and Kamala are back together and getting along well. With Johnny Sack in prison awaiting trial, the Soprano family are forced to deal with Phil Leotardo, who is proving difficult but seems to have buried the hatchet over his murdered brother Billy. Uncle Junior is becoming increasingly senile, and Janice suggests moving him into a retirement home, but Tony won't allow it. While taking care of him one night, a confused Junior shoots Tony with a gun. Rendered comatose, Tony dreams he is a salesman on a business trip, where he mistakenly exchanges his briefcase and identification with a man named Kevin Finnerty. Tony's recovery from the shooting changes his outlook, and he tries to mend his ways. However, he's faced with mounting problems in his business life. While attending the wedding of Johnny Sack's daughter, Tony becomes dizzy and almost collapses. Johnny bursts into tears when the FBI interrupt the ceremony to escort him back to prison. Phil openly mocks his boss and seems to assert control over the New York crime family. Tony, sensing that his crew are starting to perceive him as weak and frail, reasserts dominance by beating his driver over an invented slide. Christopher starts drifting away from Tony and back into the world of film. He writes a mafia horror screenplay and travels to Los Angeles to try and get Ben Kingsley to sign on. But Kingsley passes and Chris starts dabbling in drugs again. Kamala is having difficulties getting building permits for her spec house. She and Rosalie have a holiday to France. While there, Tony starts cheating on her again. One of Tony's capos, Vito Spatafor, is outed as homosexual after running into a made guy at a New York nightclub. The rumor spreads quickly and is confirmed by Meadows' boyfriend, Finn. Vito runs away to New Hampshire to escape retribution. While there, he starts a romantic relationship with a male cook at a local diner. However, Vito, uncomfortable with his sexuality and missing his family and work, eventually returns to New Jersey. Meanwhile, Phil and even members of Tony's crew have been calling for Vito's head, regarding his homosexuality as an insult to the family honor. Tony is conflicted as he considers Vito an otherwise decent guy, and more than that, a top earner, but knows he will appear weak if he fails to act. Before he can reach a decision, however, Phil intervenes and has Vito brutally killed. Tony is incensed and plots to blow up one of Phil's properties as retribution. Once again, it appears the New York and New Jersey crime families are on the verge of all-out war. However, after Phil suffers a heart attack, he and Tony are able to call a truce. So, before we get into the content itself, I was wondering if you guys had any thoughts on the very surreal opening montage, which is this series of clips that kind of catch us up on the last year of the characters, and it's set to this reading of William S. Burroughs, and it's talking about the different souls that inhabit people.
I have thoughts.
What are your thoughts, Brina?
I think it's weird because it's talking about all the themes that he's going to experience at Kevin Finnerty, and you can get Catholic about it and talk about purgatory and what happens to you when you die. But to me, that's the overriding kind of theme of the season. And obviously, I have got a very specific view on what happens in the final episode.
Yeah, I agree. It creates this sort of foreboding tone where it is this process of losing who you are, like all your earthly kind of identity and earthly material things, and being adrift in this void, which I liked. And it seemed like a lot of the lyrics kind of matched up with some of the characters that we're dealing with in this season, like the Shadow, which is Adriana, that haunts Carmela, and also the treacherous soul, and then it cuts to Raymond, who's secretly betraying Tony.
There's also something I think when it first aired, some people gave the first half of this season some criticism for focusing on Vito and his story. Like, come on, we've got to resolve so much in these final episodes. But, Vito's trying to escape a life that has him in prison. So is Christopher. Like, he wants to escape into the movies and feels Tony won't let him. And then the opening episode is the one where the henchman wants to go and have a new life. Is it in Florida or something? And and basically ends up killing himself because he's under such pressure to stay. And then again, so Tony, he can't escape. He is what he is. He's the guy who has to beat up his henchmen to seem hard over, not be weak. And his escape is either death or whatever you want to make it, or living this very constrained life.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other big event from the first episode, apart from Tony getting shot at the end, is this really disturbing suicide sequence, which plays out, just all in one shot. Just this guy falling from the rafter, struggling, writhing on the end of a rope, and then going limp. I don't know, any thoughts on that? I guess it doesn't play a big plot role in the season, but it does really go to that theme of characters feeling trapped in these vicious cycles of violence and deception and really there's no way to get out. And really just the apathy of his superiors. Like he keeps trying to approach them to have some kind of determination over his life, and they just kind of shrug and say, yeah, we thought about it. Nah, you're good where you are.
Yeah, and I mean, the trap thing, I think, has been playing out in previous seasons as well. I mean, there's a lot of people who have tried to, I can't remember Steve Buscemi's character's name, but cousin somebody. What was his name?
Tony Blundetto.
Tony,
yeah,
right.
yeah.
Thank you. Blundetto. He was also, he was straight for a little while, but ultimately nobody seems to be able to sustain that in the same way, you have Chrissy with his sobriety, or you have Carmela when she was thinking about divorcing Tony and she had that encounter with that really old psychiatrist guy who told her, like, well, yeah, you leave, but you have to leave everything behind. You have to leave the money behind, right?
Mm-hmm.
And nobody seems to be able to do that. Nobody can stick with actually doing a job as opposed to just, taking other people's money.
And even Chrissy, even when Tony says, okay, go to Hollywood, do your thing, and when it doesn't work out with Ben Kingsley, his instinct is still, and it's kind of goofy, but he does rob Lauren Bacall of her gift basket. But it's when all else fails, the lowest thing will come back, right? I mean, that's the fail-safe.
Yeah.
He's just he wants his corners, right? So
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think my single favorite moment in the whole season is when Sir Ben Kingsley sits down in that aeroplane, sees them, and goes, "Fuck." He swears so
always
brilliantly.
It's always strange when you get real characters in it. Who was the guy that Jon Favreau? I think he was in season 2, was it?
Yeah.
And they often play really unflattering versions of themselves, which I always appreciate.
Definitely. But I mean, there's an argument, isn't there? All these people trying to escape and just never managing to. That Tony's basically quite cancerous.
Yeah, Tony definitely is cast in a darker light. I mean, it seems like every successive season he's become worse and worse and worse, and he's now becoming this source of misery for everyone around him.
That's not untrue, but I also think that it's a machine, right? I mean, and he's certainly part of that machine, but he's caught in it in the same way too, right? He can't show any kind of weakness or kindness. He's constrained by the job that he has to do, right?
And I think we're meant to feel sympathy with him, when he doesn't want to prosecute Vito for being gay, as soon as he has that sort of attack of weakness at the wedding, it's mortifying for him, but it's mortifying for us. We feel very uncomfortable about it. And that's the joy of watching Tony. You can see the stuff he does that's cancerous. You can still feel sympathy for him. And as Lady K and I were jokingly saying, he's still a deeply attractive person. And that's the danger of Tony. He's incredibly charming. So, it's very messed up. It's amazing HBO allowed this to get that dark and surreal and crazy.
Okay, so thoughts on Tony getting shot and the whole 2-episode coma dream sequence. What did you guys think when you first saw this?
I think on another show it would have been very risky to have it, but it's you can get off with it in this show, but you can, but not in other shows, I think.
You have to earn the right to do that kind of thing, don't you? But they'd done they'd done sort of fairly extended cool dream sequences before, nothing this long, but yeah, I think it's brilliant, and actually rewatching it, the thematic richness of it is just astounding.
Yeah, they definitely paved the way in previous seasons, those paranoid food sickness dreams he had over
with
Big
the
Pussy and that test dream when he has to be forced to kill his cousin.
The long antidepressant-fueled fantasy about the Italian woman. Yeah.
With Isabella, yeah. But the coma thing's almost not a dream. It's almost like this point where he's passed over into the afterlife, into this purgatory space that seems to be connected to death. He keeps approaching death, and there's this really weird big spotlight in the middle of the town where he's existing that just kind of swivels around and around, and it just kind of haunts him, and he keeps drifting further and further towards it. So he almost belongs more to that spiritual realm which the Sopranos keeps flirting with, when Paulie has a vision of purgatory and hears the voices of the dead when he goes to see that psychic. The Sopranos are always interested in this element that often haunts a lot of these characters because they're so brought up with the idea of Catholic fire and brimstone and all that.
Yeah, and I think insofar as this is an examination of Tony, he is brought up in that world, so that's going to be something that he's thinking about. But I think there's a lot of really Catholic overtones in this season, far more than any before, even though like other seasons had priests in it, and yet this is the one which I think is like takes it the most seriously in a way.
You're gonna be fine, Tony. I know it. The doctors say you're gonna be fine too. They are very confident. They know that you're really strong. You're strong as a bull. You know that that's always gotten to me. When you used to pick me up and throw me over your shoulder. Oh my God, Tony. You used to get me so hot down there. I can feel it right now just thinking about it. You are gonna be okay, Tony. Your friends, your kids, all love you.
The coma is also an examination of Tony stripped of all those things that brought him up. Like even his accent changes when he's in this dream. And the character he seems to be inhabiting is like almost this alternate version of Tony, like what Tony could have been if he hadn't been raised by Olivia or if he hadn't been brought up in this mob world where he's this fairly decent guy, he's law-abiding, he's faithful to his wife. It's like the Tony that could have been kind of thing.
Yeah, almost like a spin-off of The Sopranos with no violence. Something Gandolfini playing the...
PG spin-off, yeah.
I was almost going to say it's like Tony without all the excuses. Like it's all the excuses he's ever used to his therapist about, but it was my parents, I was brought into this world, I have no escape. And he's still basically fairly miserable and drifting. Yeah,
that's a good point. There's a boredom to it.
Yeah.
But along with the Catholic overtones, there's also this more Eastern religion overtones in this dream sequence where he comes across all these monks, and it's about this idea of this karmic retribution that's always coming for him. The monks have this debt that they want to extract from him. So that idea that all the sins that they're going to catch up to him eventually.
So do you think it's more like an expression of his fear about, because we never really see him being like religious in this show, but does he have a kind of residual fear about if he dies, he's going to get punished for all the crappy stuff that he's done?
I mean, I think a lot of the gangsters at one time or another, I feel like, have moments of that, right? They have the Catholic background and they do a lot of really fucked up stuff.
Yeah.
I think even beyond just the Catholic thing, like Tony does, or he did at one point have a conscience, and that was often tied to children and animals, like the empathy he shows towards animals. But over a lot of the struggles throughout the season is him having to suppress that conscience and do something horrible. So it's also a psychological splinter in his mind that he knows what he's doing is wrong, but he does it anyway because business demands it, or his ego or his arrogance demands it.
Yeah. I'll tell you what somewhat surprised me. I'd completely forgotten that AJ has this moment where he wants to get a gun and avenge his father. Like, the only time we ever see AJ really, I guess, expressing an interest in that life. But heartfelt, right? He feels he has to man up, and obviously he feels there's a weight of expectation on him to extract some kind of revenge. I mean, it's absurd because we know he's going to be utterly incompetent in trying, but I thought it was almost... kind of noble in a way. Like, it's the first time we see AJ actually thinking of something outside of himself and trying to be, I don't know. I mean, this is the guy who obviously is really struggling to express obviously deep felt feelings about his dad, because otherwise he wouldn't be trying to procure a gun. But I just thought it was really touching that some people can't really express proper emotion and then they have to revert to, well, I'll just talk about video games or something silly.
I mean, I was going to say, I don't, it's not a great moment or anything, but as AJ moments go, it's pretty much the best you got. Yeah,
exactly.
it's a
like
low bar to get over.
Shit. Yeah, exactly. He's such a horrible.
So, any thoughts on Tony and Camilla's marriage now that they're back together? Because all last season they spent separated. They finally come back together. How do you think that plays out? Does it succeed?
It's seemed kind of some kind of truths, not really passionate.
In the first episode, they seem to be getting along to some extent. They're happy with each other. They're going out for dinner. it does kind of devolve into more material things, like, you know, Tony helping with the spec house and buying her cars and things. But I don't know, I felt there was an emotional component, at least at the beginning of the season. But it does gradually degrade. Like, a lot of the season is Tony feeling lucky that he survived the coma, but gradually falling back into old habits. He starts cheating on her again by the end of the season.
Yeah, but even her, right? I mean, she tries to make this big bid for financial independence and separates from him. And she's always, in a sense, thought of herself as perhaps more moral person, or lied to herself about how much she does or doesn't know about stuff. And that's been discussed in previous Vox podcasts. But at the end of the day, she's quite happy that she knows her father's built this shoddy house. And her feeling isn't, I feel bad for the people who live here and buy it. It's just, get the permits, don't let me lose money. And she wants Tony like everyone else for what he can provide. So yeah, I think there's love there. I do. But I think it's also a financial transaction. And she becomes, I don't know. I think her journey in this whole season, I guess, is one of becoming basically as ruthless as him in a way. Or more knowingly ruthless. She doesn't come out of the spec house singing in glory, put it that way.
And she won't even cough up $300,000 to bet on the Jets or who the Chargers.
Oh yeah, that was a big fight. That was pretty, yeah.
To slightly mitigate that, I mean, she was feeling bad. I mean, she was up nice worrying about the shoddy lumber or whatever at the end. Not that it excuses her, of course, and definitely while it was happening, she was certainly like, fuck it, let's get Tony to lean on somebody and get this done.
Yeah, I mean, that's my point. Like, it doesn't stop her, though, does it? I mean...
Yeah, exactly.
Much
just like
Tony,
all these other people, right?
Yeah, like Tony, he has the change of heart, but then he carries on anyway, so...
Yeah, of course.
And even Christopher, you know, he'll get on the wagon for a while, but then, you know, he's going to end up shooting up in the back of a car.
Well, yeah, one of the highlights of this season was that the relationship between Chris and Tony, and the way it very gradually drifts apart. And in a lot of different ways. Like, it's not necessarily... Well, it's a few big things. Adriana is obviously a big part of it. And that thing that's just never resolved, never really spoken about. But did you guys have any thoughts on that?
Were they ever close, really?
Yeah,
I think they were. I think they were like a father-son kind of relationship for most of the series.
Sort of, but I mean, I don't know. All of these people are just so repressed and so forced into the roles that they have to act out just in the course of their jobs and stuff like that. That it's, to some degree, I sort of feel like nobody really has friends, right? There's always a lot of anger and jealousy, and like there's a lot of negative stuff going on between almost everybody.
Yeah, I guess I just think back to that episode where they're driving home and they rip off those bikers, and then they get drunk and they're just kind of spilling feelings to each other.
Right.
And there was just this warmth and this familial bond that's how I've always associated with them. But it all kind of fizzles out at the end, and you realized how hollow it's become. But to me, it always felt like it alluded to something, a connection between them that was there in the original seasons. Like, Tony did genuinely love Chris and saw him as a little brother, and you see that with Melfi in the therapy sessions.
I mean, I just think that Tony has a lot of real and genuine emotions to people, but they get overlaid with his crazy, irrational hatreds, too. Like, I'm thinking about the episode where he and Polly have to go on the run because of the gun charge.
Yeah.
And, like, it's almost like 50-50 when he's with Polly. Like, sometimes they're reminiscing and Tony's really into it. And, like, they're both completely on the same page. And it's like Polly then, you know, is basically doing the same thing and is continuing to reminisce. But, like, Tony is tired of it. And it morphs into this... from this like close friendship, thinking about when Polly was this cool kid when he was a young man and stuff, and it just morphs into this like loathing and like, why are you always talking about bullshit, you horrible old man? And it's really weird. I mean, like, there's definitely like deep feelings and friendship and love there, but it's also overlaid by these weird tendency to loathe people.
Yeah, and I think part of that is a lot of the memories they share are laced with horrible events and things that Tony doesn't want to think about. You know, past murders that they've committed, and a lot of the buried bodies that only Chris and Tony know about, and especially Adriana. Like, that's a huge wedge between them.
Yeah, I think that in terms of Tony and Chris drifting in the later seasons, I think that there's a degree to which, Chris can't see Tony without thinking about what may or may not have been going on between Tony and Adriana. I don't think that would ever really have left Chris alone, no matter how much time passed.
Oh, as in them having an affair, or the Tony had to kill her?
I think the affair thing, maybe even more than Tony having to kill her. I don't know. That's kind of the way I see it.
Well, that is another weird part of their relationship, that they become these kind of rivals, like sexual rivals, like this woman that Tony wants, and in this horrible misogynistic way has like laid claim to, and Chris has to see her in secret, and that also contributes to the discord between them, that this lady finds Chris attractive and not Tony, or any attraction she felt to Tony was because he was wealthy and powerful, whether the attraction she finds to Chris is because he's young and attractive and she likes him. So part of it might be that like youth envy, where Tony feels he's getting old and resents Chris for that.
Well, the freedom
the
that
Adriana
Chris
thing,
has, like Chris is single, so he can do it. So, you know, Tony has to prove that he can do it too. He's a very selfish man. Like, he thinks of himself in his own head as so generous. He's so loyal to his childhood friends. He'll do anything for his buddy with his restaurant. He'll do anything for his daughter. And he thinks of himself as this great guy. But actually, he's like a little spoiled child. When he doesn't get something, he really lashes out.
Yeah. And I mean, that's something we get to see a lot, and I think James Gandolfini like acts the shit out of it every single time.
Yeah.
But like that moment in a conversation where somebody says something Tony doesn't like, and his eyes start getting like really piggy, and you know he's gonna flip out. He does a great job at that.
I was actually thinking
just the ripples of frustration in his face.
There's a few scenes like when remember they're going to that new restaurant that's so fashionable, and he's wearing this really nice suit, and he's with Carmela, and they're having a great time. And he looks really handsome and really dashing and very charming. And then, like you say, the way Gandolfini acts it, he can look really disgusting and viscerally angry and disgusted and sickening, and like he's going to lash out at you. And he can do it non-verbally so quickly. And you just see the eyes just flicker, really, and it's so disturbing. It's for a guy. The
eyes, and he does a thing with his lips where his teeth look really jagged somehow.
Yes,
like I don't even know what's going on, but like he does a thing with his lips where his teeth look. I think bestial maybe is a good word, and like his forehead comes down a little bit, and he gets that like fat little bump on the top of his forehead. He does. I mean, it's a really interesting transformation.
And especially for a guy,
the shadow as well in his eyes.
Yeah, by all accounts, James Gandolfini in real life was just an absolute pussycat as well. So it's even more amazing.
Oh, he could be pretty angry when the paparazzi sort of bothered him. He would lash out and attack their cameras and things. But
fair enough.
But on set, according to cast members, he was lovely.
Yeah.
It seems he's a very physical actor in some sense. You can really see the transformation on his body and his face when he goes into that dark mode.
Another big story this season is Vito being outed as gay and having to go on the run. Any thoughts on that? Did you enjoy that storyline?
I don't remember it clearly. I suspect the first time I saw it, I was not enamored of it. Although I did always like the mustachioed short order cook. He was always very charming, I thought. But yeah, subsequently I enjoy it more, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that it's necessarily bad, but it just feels very different from the rest of the series. I was reading on the AV Club, and their review is like Vito escapes the Sopranos and gets onto the Gilmore Girls set, and that's kind of what it feels like. It's this quaint little country town, and it's deliberately almost like utopic to Vito. It's everyone seems so tolerant and accepting, and it's these idyllic green fields, and everyone knows each other. So it is this fantasy of this, like, similar to what Tony goes through, I guess, in the coma. It's like the life you could have had kind of thing.
And he's bored to tears.
Exactly, yeah. He's still compelled. He's sort of bored by the suburban life, the domestic routine, having to work and constantly checking your watch to see if the day's over. And he's compelled to return to New Jersey, like where the action is, where he feels on top.
Yeah, his whole life seems very addictive. He needs that to survive almost, or to not get bored, as you said.
10:30. Gotta be. Hour and a half. Lunch. The halfway fucking point. Don't look at your watch. Not yet. Save it. Treat yourself. 10 to 11. Maybe 5 of. Don't look. Think of those sandwiches Jim made. When you've eaten the last bite, this fucking day is halfway gone. $11:30. Has to be. Look at the angle of the sun. Maybe even 11:45. Okay. Look. Now. Fuck me!
And I guess that's the kind of theme of the
and-
season as well, isn't it? Addiction. So Tony's gambling, Chrissy's drugs, but people just needing that lifestyle. Even Carmela, she needs the lifestyle, the money. Her basic worry this whole season is that she's going to be left with nothing.
Yeah, and there's a lot of resentment in how she sees Angie Pompensero, the fact that she's lost her husband, but she's taken charge of her life. She's running a successful business. She's making deals. She's buying her own cars. And that frustration's about having to be constantly dependent on Tony for everything.
Absolutely.
Money, sexual gratification, everything.
Yeah. How did you think they handled Vito's kid? Like his son taking a shit in the shower at school and stuff, and becoming emo.
It was a little bit cliche, I think. It was a bit heavy-handed.
Yeah, it's kind of sad, I guess, that the kid. I don't know if it was that convincing.
It is
but
sad.
I guess it was kinda,
I mean, I feel like Tony and Phil, right? Where it's just kind of like neither of them are willing to put any actual effort or money into it. But it is kind of a thing where you're like, I don't fucking know what to do with. I mean, like, I don't know what to do. This is beyond me.
Just this ugly problem that they both sort of had a hand in creating, but neither of them wanted to deal with it. I mean, it shows that like real people were affected by this.
Yeah.
This actually broke up a family. What they did.
I just kind of felt like that kid actually was a really good actor, and I just felt they could have done more with it, but they probably didn't want to spend that much time at that point. And I mean, they'd used some pretty stark imagery of him really like feeling very distressed, and it just felt like that particular storyline is always the one I felt wasn't served very well.
Any thoughts on like Tony struggling to deal with what he should do with Vito? Because again, it's one of those crises of conscience where he really doesn't actually have this desire to kill Vito. He has these stock answers like, I'm a Catholic, gay people are disgusting, but deep down he's like, whatever, behind closed door, what do I really care? Vito's a decent guy. But in the end, he kind of has to quell that because it's creating such a big problem with the more old-fashioned members of his crew.
But is it even that Vito's decent, just more that he makes them a bunch of money and he's racking up the gambling debts?
I mean, that's definitely part of it. But
yeah, that's the other question. Yeah.
But he also doesn't. I mean, like I'm not saying that Tony's not capable of putting his disgust below his greed. But I do think that he just doesn't really give that much of a shit about Vito's personal life.
And to some extent, like after his coma, there was some sense that he was trying to turn over a new leaf or be a bit more compromising. Stop and smell the roses is like his mantra for a little bit. But Phil keeps insisting. Paulie keeps insisting, and he's like, he just doesn't want to do it. He keeps mulling it over, and he can't justify to himself that Vito should be killed. But in the end, it's like, I can't keep fighting Phil on it.
Yeah,
and that's ultimately what persuades him.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on Paulie this season? He finds out his mother isn't who he thought he was. Isn't who he thought she was. That's it. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, I love Paulie, obviously. This isn't the half of the season with the mum, right? This isn't the Nucci season bit of the season.
Yeah, no, that's it. Where Nucci reveals she
this half. Okay.
fostered him. Yeah.
His reaction's pretty hardcore.
It is, yeah. It's very traditional, like that idea of you betrayed me. It doesn't matter that she actually raised him. It's like, you're not my real mother.
Is this the half of the season where we have the procession, like the battle with the priest?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Refuses to shell and chip in for the crown.
You know why I love
Curses
Paulie?
the whole carnival.
Because Paulie is like straightforward. He's a thug. He's got a code. He doesn't. He's like Seinfeld. That the tagline was we never mature, we never grow, we never hug. That's Paulie.
Yeah.
Paulie does not grow. He does not evolve.
Yeah.
He does not hug. He is a judgmental asshole legend.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, through most of the series, he sort of knew who he was, and he was completely content in that, his place in the world.
Yeah.
But I kind of think that's one of the rubs in this season, the fact that because he feels he's been living a lie his whole life, whether that's the case or not. But he feels kind of unmoored from who he thought he was, and he starts to. You see that with the church as well. He starts to lose faith in a lot of the institutions he sort of abided by his whole life. He refuses to chip in for the church, and starts losing faith in Tony. Loses faith in his mother, and because through a lot of those episodes, he feels really sort of adrift.
When he calls his mama, and the way he pronounces the word whore, it's like whore. It's so mean.
Yeah.
Oh,
Whore.
poor little old Italian woman. But yeah, I just think you almost didn't need that storyline. Paulie to me is a bit like Silvio Dante. Like, I don't need to have lots of evolution and backstory. They're just there, these linchpins.
Yeah, I mean, he's a great character. He's often put up as comic relief, but I think there's also this sort of fascinating tragedy to a guy like Paulie, where he's such a product of his time and place and the environment.
Yeah, but I agree with being like he and Silvio are definitely the rocks, and I don't want either of them to change or evolve. Like, I want them to to be the rocks that they are.
And he is ultimately. I mean, that's kind of his final line of the whole series: "I live to serve my liege," that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And whatever remains of Tony's
character.
crew, he's going to lead it. I kind of was surprised how emotional I got when Silvio's in hospital. Like, I have a lot of fondness for Silvio, bizarrely.
Although when he tries to take over Tony's family, when he's in the coma, it's just like comically incompetent.
They're the classic number 2 men, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But they both have brilliant hair. Like, I don't know. They're just legends.
Yeah.
I think that was one thing. That was one thing in the hospital that made me feel more tender towards Silvio. Was his hair wasn't slicked back; it was loose.
He's lost his power.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was like he wasn't. It wasn't the way he likes to show himself to the world, right? He was vulnerable.
Yeah, that idea of making themselves up the same way every single time. Like, their hair never changes. It's just like this Lego block that they stick on their head.
I kind of feel with Silvio, maybe what I found emotional in the hospital is because his wife's played by his real wife, and she looked really distressed. And I guess it must be like, if you see your husband of decades actually like wired up to all this machinery in hospital, that must be kind of quite freaky. So.
And a character who's otherwise so in charge and so sure of himself and just commands the room as Silvio does.
Totally.
But I did Paulie's storyline kind of ends in the first half of this season, and it is this quiet moment with the mother when he knocks on the door and just doesn't even say anything to her. He just sits down next to her and they start watching TV, which I thought was quite sweet. Yeah. And in many ways, it shows a maturity or an evolution beyond characters like Tony, where he can kind of, as incensed as he is, he does learn to just forgive her, and he realizes she does genuinely love him, and just, forget all that superstition and prejudice and all that and just be with your mum.
Yeah, almost one of the times where I don't act like immature children, like stunted emotionally, and just accept things the way they are and try to get on with it.
Yeah, I mean, they're often compared to children. They have this childlike wonder and this childlike rage and this constant, especially Paulie, this constant need for acceptance by his superiors. It is almost childlike. The mother-son relationship is a huge theme of this series.
Absolutely.
And all the permutations that go along with it, yeah. One other storyline, it really only takes up one episode, is Artie and the sort of end to his storyline. And this kind of constant midlife crisis he seems to be going through since the very beginning of the series. And it seems to be all tied into frustration. I mean, here's this surrogate for the audience, the frustrations of the working class, disillusionment with the American dream. Did you guys have any thoughts on Artie?
He's also like the grown-up version of AJ. He lives in self-pity. He really does.
Yeah.
He goes about in great pity for himself.
He does. And he's just a mean arsehole, the way he treats that new waitress or hostess. He's just a complete dick. And then he has this like big night moment where he like learns how to sort of, cook again and
So you guys don't like Artie? Because I've always sort of had a soft spot for him.
No.
I like him more earlier seasons. I like him, but he grates on me in the same way that I feel like Tony, loves him to some extent, but gets sick of him. I also
especially when he's especially when he's going up to patrons and constantly interrupting them and telling little jokes. And like if you had to deal with that person, it would be infuriating. But I kind of sympathize with him a bit, and he's just impotent rage.
I think he's like the flip.
I always
flip
found him quite
side.
entertaining.
I think he's the flip side of Tony, and I think that he has so little power. He's powerless, and people crap all over him. But whenever he gets a little bit of power, he always abuses it. Like he's really sleazy towards Adrian, and he's really kind of sleazy towards the hostess in this season. And I don't know.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like Charmaine would have done so, because she's really she's a hard ass. I think she would have done so much better in life without him. I don't know. I'm Tony when it comes to him. I see that he's a bit lovable and inept, and he, of course, he gets abused by Tony and used by him, but he's just annoying. Like, grow up.
For somebody who runs a restaurant and has kids, and to be like as immature and ridiculous as he is, I don't know.
It feels like he would have been better off without Tony, making it on his own and not, I guess, cut off all connection with
But I think
Tony.
he wouldn't have made it. I honestly don't.
No, maybe not.
In many ways, he kind of is attracted to the mafia lifestyle and idealizes it as much as anyone.
Yeah, exactly. And that lifestyle is toxic to everybody in the sense that it's sort of it's a temptation that nobody can really resist. And I think that is why he's so awful when he does get whatever little taste of power he gets, because he sees all these other people who have all sorts of different kinds of power that they can exercise, and he has one tiny little piece of power, and so it's the only thing he can exercise. And he does.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And he sort of goads them on, but never really has the balls to engage in it. Although he does at one point try and get involved with a loan shark and some wine, and that fails miserably, as we all know.
No, that did not go well.
Yeah, rips his earring out.